I love sloppy wet kisses, so I'll sing that all day, every day.
So doesn't my dog.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Irenicast. I'm your host, Jeff, and with me, as always, is my brother-in-law, Alan, and his cousin, Mona. We are post-evangelical ministers and theological thinkers grappling with our place in the progressive Christian world. Thank you for joining us for another conversation on faith and culture. This week, before we get started and introduce our guest, Benjamin L. Corey, I want to let everyone know that we have started a brand new Facebook group called Post-Evangelicals. We recently realized that there is nothing like this on Facebook as far as a place where people in a post-evangelical mindset who are rethinking and reshaping their Christian experience to go and talk and have discussions. And although we do that on our Facebook page, it's a little different to have a group available for everyone. This isn't going to be technically an Irenicast Facebook group. It is open to all post-evangelicals, whether they listen to the show or not, and it will not be a mode for us to promote just the show, but it is a place where people can come and talk. So we encourage you to check that out. It is at facebook.com/groups/post-evangelicals. We will make sure to put a link to that in the show notes, so check that out, and we'll be talking more about that as the weeks go on. So Alan, why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest today?
Benjamin is an author and speaker who has contributed to the likes of Time, Sojourners, Red Letter Christians, Christian Weekly, Mennonite World Review, and the Good Men Project, as well as giving interviews on HuffPost Live, The Drew Marshall Show, Up for Debate, and repeatedly, Tell Me Everything. Benjamin published the book Undiluted, Rediscovering the Radical Message of Jesus in 2014. He hosts the podcast That God Show with Matthew Paul Turner, and he does much, much more. Benjamin, welcome.
Hey, thanks, guys. I'm happy to be on the show.
We are very happy you're here too. You recently received your doctorate from Fuller Theological Seminary. Is that right?
I did just a week ago Friday, and man, it was a long journey, and I'm super stoked to be done. I have been in seminary longer than I've been a parent, and so I've been in seminary since the end of 2008, and I am super excited to finally be done. As much as I enjoyed it, I'm just thankful to be done.
So should we call you Dr. Corey from here on out?
No, you don't have to do that.
Sir Dr. Corey. You got your degree in intercultural studies.
Correct. Yeah, it's a DIS, Doctor of Intercultural Studies. And what I did was I developed a theology of personal shalom that can be used in trauma aftercare. I specifically studied human trafficking aftercare programs throughout the United States, and kind of looked at phenomenology of what they were doing and how they were measuring success and what the gaps were that were missing. And I felt one of the big gaps that I noticed missing in the field research was really a well-laid goal, which I thought was absent. So I developed a personal theology of shalom that I think can really help guide not just human trafficking aftercare, but any kind of trauma aftercare. I anticipate that it would be really useful, for example, for people who have been incarcerated and now returning back to mainstream society. And this theology that I've developed really kind of, I think, provides a roadmap to a really holistic and healthy life and a roadmap to healing.
That's incredible. Can I ask what drew you to trauma studies?
Back in the day, I had gotten into kind of the human trafficking whole movement when that was kind of the movement of the day. And then when I wrote a proposal to Fuller to do doctoral work on it, and got in there, and I had co-founded a small nonprofit that did trafficking education and stuff like that. So I've done work in India. I've studied, sex workers at the brothels in Mumbai in India, studied there. And in northeastern India, in the region of Assam, which is detached from mainland India, looked at some trafficking issues there. So I was really interested in it and wanted to realize that not many people were actually studying it in the academy, and certainly not at a doctoral level. So I thought I would study it that way. And then the whole project just kind of took on a life of its own. And ultimately, the end result is nothing like what I anticipated doing from the beginning. But I'm really stoked with how it came out.
That kind of sounds like your personal story too, right? you ended up somewhere different than where you started.
Oh, absolutely, man. Absolutely.
I think that's something that our listeners and, us personally can identify with quite a bit. You build yourself as the former Fundie and blogged underneath that title for years. And then as in you were a former fundamentalist that is no longer fundamentalist, right?
Correct. That would be me.
Hence Fundie. The name former.
Hence the name former Fundie. Well, Fundie. Sorry. Fundie. Formerly Fundie.
That's right.
And now you're in a place that you didn't even dream you would have been when you started seminary.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Life has changed so much in so many different ways. It's unreal. It's been a wild journey. When I went to seminary back in 2008, I got there a hardcore conservative, came from very conservative background. I was career military and had ran in very conservative circles there. And, it was a difficult process. And, I've written a lot about that over the course of the years, and just getting in there and settling into seminary and realizing that, man, maybe everything I thought I knew, I didn't know. For example, when I had my dissertation defense the other day at Fuller, basically you sit before your doctoral committee and you have to make the case why you should walk out of the room a doctor. And, I told my committee, I said, listen, if being at the end of your studies and defending your dissertation means you have all the answers, I said, then I am a very poor candidate for a doctor. I said, however, if being somebody who has learned to ask the hard questions and to wrestle with the questions and to be okay with not having answers, if that's what it means, then I think that there's a case for why I should walk out of the room a doctor. And I summarized it with the great American philosopher Don Henley. The more I know, the less I understand, and all the things I thought I had figured out, I'm having to learn again. And that, for me, really actually summarizes my entire journey, in that it's been a journey of realizing that the things I thought I knew might not be right. And then there are little discoveries along the way that I continue to find that invite me to rethink everything. And as I find these nuggets, I'm like, wow, this one right here invites me to just rethink everything. And so it continues to invite me on a journey, and it's one that I haven't exactly arrived on yet.
Some people would call that courage. Would you consider that courageous, to be open-minded to change of that perspective?
That may be a word that accurately describes it. I have a hard time, thinking of myself as courageous. For me, I'm really working on being authentic. I just want to be authentic. I want to be in whatever way I can. I want to be truly me. I want to be fully me, and I want to be the real deal. And when I started processing my thoughts, and I got bored one day and started a blog called Formerly Fundie, and within 6 weeks, my life had radically changed, and just had my first book deal 6 weeks later, and from there, just everything has been a really fast and wild ride. And all along that way, though, I've wanted to make sure that I didn't cave into just the demands that there are when you write for large audiences and catering to the different whims. I want to be that one person who, and maybe not, I don't want to say that one person, because I'm sure there's others out there, but I want to be a person who is really and truly authentically them. And the person you see online is the person that you see in real life. And I work hard to get that right. I certainly have a harder edge in my written stuff than I do in real life. But I'm trying to be very open and authentic and very transparent about this journey that I'm on, where I don't have it all figured out. And in fact, I go back to old blogs sometimes and read something. I'm like, dude, I do not agree with you. I really disagree with my own self. And And I'm okay with that. Frank Schaefer's a really good friend of mine. And I was at his house one time and we were sitting in his backyard just talking about that. And he said, Ben, he's like, I get letters from people all the time that will say, hey, you wrote this in this book and I wanted to know more what you thought. And he said, sometimes I'll read it and be like, you know what? I don't know what I meant. And in fact, I don't even think that anymore, So, but yeah, it's a journey. I'm certainly not where I began, but I don't know if I could really describe where I'm even at now, if that makes any sense.
I mean, calling your blog and starting that Formerly Fundie, obviously you were at a certain point in your journey away from fundamentalism.
Yeah.
So leading up to putting yourself out there like that with a blog, that's pretty explicit as far as this is the direction I'm headed.
Yeah.
What were some of the formative experience that brought you from fundamentalism to that point to decide to kind of get some new ideas out there?
And what kind of fundamentalism did you come from? Because there's a few different types that a lot of us are familiar with.
Definitely. Yeah, true. So I grew up I'll answer that one first, and then I'll go on to the formative experiences because I think they're both great questions. I grew up in a, fundamentalist Baptist church in a small farm town community. But truth be told, and I try to put this out there, and I'm mentioning it, I'm writing a new book now that's due to Harper 1 in September, that my early years, man, I loved my church. I still think they're some of the nicest people I ever knew. And in fact, it may be truer that they were more conservative than fundamentalist. But in my teenage years, I got wrapped up with an organization called Word of Life Bible Institute out of Scroon Lake, New York. And those guys were definitely fundamentalists. And I did 2 mission trips overseas with them in high school, and which really were kind of I don't know, they were almost like where they were kind of coaching you to come do your first year out of school at their Bible school in upstate New York. And so that's where I went right out of high school in 1994. That's where it really got my head mixed up. I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. But it's almost like once your brain gets hardwired to think in these hard black and white binary options, even when you know something isn't right, you still end up thinking in that way. So, I mean, over the course of time, as far as formative experiences, I mean, when I started Formerly Fundie, I wasn't sure what I was. I just knew what I wasn't anymore. We were talking about before the show, my interview with Rob Bell last week, where Rob and I were talking about how there, at some points, you don't know what you believe, but you're keenly aware of what you don't believe anymore. And so I reached the point where I was keenly aware of some of the things I didn't believe anymore. And some of those experiences, really, they were born out of seminary, in that seminary was just a very humbling experience for me. Part of it was learning the Greek language and even, learning to translate scripture and realizing that, for example, there are certain words that, for example, you may be able to take the Greek word and you might have 17 different options of how to translate that one word into English. And any of those 17 choices really could carry some theological nuance to it. And so that's when I realized, wow, even, when we read the English Bible, translators are making some very specific decisions that are very imprecise as it goes from one language to the next, because Greek is a very precise language that doesn't always have a one-for-one counterpart in English. And I just realized that, man, I would be hard-pressed to just read the English Bible and to build hardcore theology that had no room for error just based on some of these English translations, just from knowing what goes into the Greek. And so that was one of it. But part of it was certainly realizing that, dispensationalism, the part of fundamentalism I came from, was hardcore hyper-dispensationalism. We were waiting for the rapture, the tribulation, the implants that were due to come any day now, which before implants, they were actually the barcodes. Yep. It keeps changing over time. But realize that, I think it was really realizing that there are a lot of things I believe that were not shared by the vast majority of Christians on a global basis. So it was things like that. But I would say the biggest formative experience or realization over the course of time that helped me realize what I wasn't anymore was that I just wasn't feeling the love. I just was not feeling the love. I was feeling angry. I was feeling like my old view was really good news for a small handful of people and really, really bad news for just about everybody else in all of human history. I had a hard time reconciling being a decent, loving human being with also maintaining that worldview, which required me to judge and condemn almost everybody else in the entire world, except for people that were just like me. And so that's when I realized that something was really wrong with the entire paradigm. And that it certainly didn't jive with the Jesus I see in the New Testament. So that's where I started to realize, man, it's time to rethink things.
No, I've got a question about about your journey. I appreciate you talking about the ideological and even the feelings. Like you weren't feeling love, you were feeling more, hopelessness or negativity. If I can kind of sum up what you said, I would like to hear a bit more about the maybe what I would call the emotional journey. I've talked to so many people who come from fundamentalist or conservative backgrounds and it's interesting that you've done so much work in trauma, and I'd like to ask you about if you've seen any overlap, because I've talked to so many people, and I don't know if there's a lot of work been done on this yet, but people coming out of those communities, because there's so much control, there's so many control mechanisms for emotional control, mental, ideological control. If, people who experience trauma-like symptoms and don't know what to do with that. So I wondered if you had that experience or if you've run across that in your research.
It's certainly an area of research that needs to be done. I would love to see a study that really explores the psychological aftermath of people who leave fundamentalism. And that could potentially be some, postdoctoral work that I do, because I would really love to do a study on that and begin to measure some of it. Certainly, I think that there is a post-traumatic church syndrome, which is the name of a book my friend Reba Riley wrote that I'd encourage folks to pick up and check out. It's a really great book. And certainly, I kind of see what I have experienced as post-traumatic church syndrome in so many ways. The emotion, you ask about the emotional part of my journey. It has been so painful that I almost have a hard time putting words to it. And some days it's hard to even revisit. I wrote about this in a post I did the other day, called Some Things I'd Do Differently If I Could Do Seminary Over Again. And I talked about how I wish that I had built a stronger support base, in that I have just lost so much. The church that originally sponsored me and sent me to seminary, they wouldn't touch me with a 10-foot pole. And, when I came back to my home state of Maine from seminary a few years ago, and I think this was really the most painful one, was we got involved with a local church plant with some people that we knew were ideologically different than us, but I was okay with the difference. And I guess I assumed that they were okay with me. And we were doing this church plant, and for a long time, things were going great. We had a small group that met every week and was really a part of my week I just really looked forward to. I could not wait until Thursday nights to share a meal and just to sit on the couch and to catch up with everybody and to see how people were doing. And then I did not know that kind of secretly behind the scenes that folks were growing uncomfortable with me. And this is before I had come out publicly, if you will. I had told them that I thought about starting a blog, but honestly, when I thought I was about starting a blog, I thought I'd be blogging for maybe 10 people. I did not know what would happen to my life. It's kind of one of those things where it's one of the rarest of stories where, almost literally exploded within the first 36 hours. And that really started creating some problems at my church. And some relationships started to grow distant from me. And I could tell that people were growing distant. And I literally had, there was a meeting where we were voting in elders and the teaching elder. And a lot of people had wanted me to be the head teacher. And I realized when they asked me to leave the room so they could deliberate that there was some issues. And when I came back into the room, it was a really difficult moment because this is a small group of people. This is literally like facing your own small group, people that are your close friends. And I thought we were just doing a formality when we're nominating and voting for elders. And walked in and sat down, and one of them said, Ben, there's a problem with your nomination. And I'm like, really? Okay, there were a couple questions we need to ask you. And I knew that my blog would come up. I expected that. You can't be provocative and expect there not to be some issue with that. So I was ready to answer those questions. And I had a heads up while I was waiting outside that something was wrong because one of my friends in the meeting who was loyal to me excused himself to the bathroom and sent me a text. He said, there's a major problem. And he named names with who the major problems were with. And he said, when you come back in, try to, be as humble as possible. And I think things will be okay. And so I came back in, and he said, so the first question is, he said, it's with your blog. And so I wasn't surprised. He said, would you be willing to put a disclaimer on there that your views don't represent this church? I was like, hey, no problem. That is incredibly reasonable. And I think that's a great thing to do. And in fact, I told him I've actually already done that if you look at my bio page. And then he said, well, he's like, the second allegation is far more serious. I said, okay, what's the deal? And he says, are you really the head of your household? I was like, oh my gosh.
Sorry. Oh, wow.
No, for those communities, that's a very serious question, right?
I know.
Yeah. And,
but I physically cringe. Like that brings up like memories.
Yeah, dude. I wanted to spit nails. I was just so pissed off. I couldn't stand it. It would be one thing, like if this was an interview with a church that you didn't know me and I came and I candidated for, but these were my friends. And I'm thinking, like, what the bloody hell are you people talking about? We're all in the same small group together, and so I was really upset, and things didn't go well. And I went home, and some people called me afterwards, and they were like, "We're sorry that happened. We can't believe that happened. That should never have happened." And that made me feel better. But clearly, there was some real division in the church, and eventually that division all came to a head one day when literally we were sitting in chairs around in a circle, and one woman stood up and said, "He said that Christians should be for a higher minimum wage," and then she stormed out of the front church.
Jeez.
You're not even joking. My goodness.
No, I'm not even
of
joking.
All the things to get mad about.
I know. Frank, yeah. So Frank Schaefer and I, we were on an episode of Huffington Post Live talking about pro-life hypocrisy. And on the show, I said, hey, if you're really pro-life, you ought to be for a higher minimum wage because we're talking quality of life here and people to be able to live and this and that. And man, she was pissed. And she sat in her car. Like you could see her white knuckling it in the church outside of her car. People were like, come back inside, just come talk. And so finally she drove off. And I'm like, man, this is some weird, if that's what you're mad at me for. And then another person turned to me and he said, how can you say there's no rapture? And I'm like, oh man, I'm a theologian. We talk about these things. And things just went really, really bad. And after that day, like so many people, and it was a small church, but enough of a percentage of the church left that there was just no way for us to keep going. They took the money with them. They took everything. And so we were just screwed. So long story short, by publicly being a person who processes my faith journey out loud and very, very publicly. And I do that because I think that there are thousands and thousands of people out there in the same journey as me. And I want to be that one person who has the courage to do it, authentically and transparently so people can know they're not alone. I think the most common fan mail I get is, hey, I've just found your blog and I no longer feel alone. It's literally like one version of the same email I get hundreds and hundreds of times. But that became such an issue for my closest friends that we ended up losing our entire circle of friends. So that's a really long answer to your question, but my emotional journey has been a very, very painful one. And even now, I still wrestle with the dichotomy of being somebody with hundreds of thousands of readers every month who is extremely isolated in his real world life. So people see me online and they see this online persona who shows up in your news feed all the time. But my real life is very, very isolated. And so there are very, two different versions of who I am. And that's a very painful thing for me to toggle between because my day-to-day life is actually very isolated and filled with a lot of loss and pain.
I'm so sorry to hear that. And I think
sucks.
I speak for all of us that we all resonate with that. You're not alone, even in feeling isolated. Thanks. It's strange to be like we've gotten a tiny taste of being a public figure like that, but the ways that people change the way they relate to you and all of it is, and it's got to be really strange to be dropped. It sounds like you were really dropped by your home community, like in a wide way. Then really quickly embraced by the liberal media and the public and the liberal media. I mean, I didn't mean like the liberal media. liberal media has embraced you. You'll never get away. I mean, like, lib
You just
Christians.
ended my career.
That would be like Bizarro World to go through that. You said it happened in 6 weeks?
Yeah, well, I mean, it happened really fast. I mean, my third blog post had 100,000 readers, and that was like the third blog I'd ever written. And 6 weeks later, I had my 2-book deal that I signed just 6 weeks after I started blogging. And so it happened really fast, and but it has come at a huge price. I mean, even after all of our friends dropped us and we were totally isolated, what we did was we actually plugged in with the refugee community because we were like, man, we're refugees. And so we actually spent a year and a half with Congolese refugees, meeting in the basement of a local church, worshiping in French and Lingala. And we were totally received by the refugee community. And in so many ways, it was so healing. They would tell me, you're the whitest Congolese guy I've ever met in my life. And, you're one of us now, and just totally received by them. And even that, came back to haunt me because of my old circle and being a public figure, in that we were just meeting in the basement of a local church. It was a church I didn't know. I'd never met the pastor. And after a period of time, the Congolese pastor needed to move on to a new job, and he had asked me to temporarily take over the church so I could transition it to indigenous leadership. But we needed to really develop some leadership before that could happen. And he was like, I need to introduce you to Dave. And Dave was the pastor of the church that owned the building. And I'd never met Dave before, didn't know Dave from Adam. And so we agreed to meet for breakfast, and sat down with him at a Denny's and poured my coffee and complimented him on his shirt. I said, geez, I like that shirt. And he put some cream in his coffee, and he looked over at me and he said, I know who you are. He said, I need you to tell me I need you to tell me everything you think about homosexuals. And these are literally like the first words out of his mouth. I'm like, oh man, this is not going to go well. And so that was his first question, and that's where we got stuck. And basically he said, it would be a real shame to have to kick out the refugees out of our church because of you. And
wow.
And so I was like, oh man. So I told the Congolese pastor, I'm like, I can't do this. And so he turned down his other job offer to keep the church. But still, about 3 weeks later, we got an eviction notice. And I was so guilt-stricken because being the one Westerner working, I was basically like a missionary in residence with these refugees, with these Congolese and Rwandan and Angolan refugees. And the last thing I wanted to do was to cause harm. I had been very careful about not holding too high of a position, not imparting any kind of Western values, not even disagreeing with them in areas where I disagreed. I just wanted to come alongside them and support them. And now here I ended up getting them freaking kicked out of their building. And it was just so hard for me. And that was when I realized that this is in small town Maine, especially being a public figure recognized by the media and all that jazz, it's going to be hard for me to find a local community where there's not a target on my back, by conservatives, and I later found out that it was another local pastor who found out that I was working with the refugees, who called that pastor and said, hey, you have no idea who's in your own basement. You need to check this guy out. And so it's, in a way, it's in my local community. I'm not just abandoned by my friends, I'm hunted by them. And so that makes the isolation even harder. But it makes me even more determined to fight, and to fight hard, because I realize that I am just a representative of thousands of people across the country who are all being screwed over in the same way by the religious right. And I don't want to be a total jerk about it, but there is a fight to be had. There are some churches that need to be wrestled out of the hands of some people. There's people who need to be encouraged to know that the path of love is not the wrong path, even if they come down hard on you for it. And so all the loss and isolation I've experienced has just made me all the more determined that, I am going to fight this fight, and I am going to be a voice for these people, and I'm going to help them rally to a new cause, and I'm going to be unapologetic about doing it.
Nice. So is that feeling, that desire to kind of speak out a little bit more, is that part of what motivated you to start the podcast, and how did you get connected with Matthew? As far as
sure,
I'm assuming, based on listening to the show from time to time, that everything you're describing now seems to be very well represented in your show.
Yeah, definitely. So what happened with the show is I had never really thought about it. I had kind of hit a certain point with my blog where things were kind of in a steady stride. And it was about the time my book Undiluted was coming out. And Matthew Paul Turner and I had followed his blog for a long time. I didn't really know him. I mean, we were friends on Facebook, and we had kind of briefly interacted, just commenting on each other's status once in a while, but didn't really know each other. And then we realized that we both had books coming out on the same day. His book, Our American God, was coming out on the same day as Undiluted. And so I actually reached out to him and asked him if he would endorse my book, if I could send him a copy. And he asked if, we could have a phone call and to actually talk. And so we got to chatting, and basically throughout the conversation, we said, listen, when at this level, people become competitors, and everybody is fighting to be, who can, get the biggest market, who can get the most readers, who can get the biggest book deals. Because, even though you're being true and authentic, once you start doing this to feed your family, like, you have to treat it like a business. And so there's almost like a necessary evil component about it. And I wouldn't even call it necessary evil. It's just, you have to be smart. You have to treat this like a business. And so we both recognized that that people like us would be inclined to compete for the same readers and same folks. And so we said, we would both like to see more community among writers and among those who kind of do what we do. And so we said, hey, what would it look like if we developed a very public friendship and partnership? And what could that look like? What kind of example could that set for others? What could it look like if we almost combined audiences and tried to speak to both of our audiences at the same time? And through that conversation, we're like, what if we did a podcast together? And so through that conversation, just the idea for that God show was born. And so that's where it all started. And, even though it's been, I guess, a year and a half, it'll be 2 years in August, we're still really figuring it out. Matthew and I have very similar personalities in that we're both thinkers, thought leaders, both very abstract, but we both suck at details. So that God show has been notorious for being inconsistent. And it's something that both Matthew and I have felt really bad about because it's not for a lack of love for the show. It's just we get so caught up into our projects and this and that. So actually, next Sunday, Matthew and I are getting ready to head to the Dominican for a week and on a work trip. And we are hoping, we were talking last night about really spending some downtime during the Dominican, really planning and figuring out what we have to do to take the show to the next level. And I realized we need to bring in some people who have different personalities than us to do some admin stuff and help give us some structure, because I think it's time to delegate those tasks that we're not so strong on. But it's been a lot of fun. We've been able to have some fun friends on, like Rob Bell and some others, and just to really talk about some things that Matthew Paul, of course, has a very similar journey to me as well. So I think he resonates, and he has become one of my best friends in real life. And I hope he would say the same about me. So it's just been a great thing all around.
What do you hope to see in liberal conservative dialogue? Do you see your podcast as a site for that, or more for like the remnant of people who are making their exodus from conservative worlds? Do you have conservative people in dialogue with the show, or that's something we've wrestled with here? Sure.
I think probably for the podcast, it's more probably the most loyal fans. So it's, probably the folks that are exiting out and just really dig your stuff. I do try to do a lot of dialogue through my blog and other things like that. I've, of course, tried to do a lot of dialogue with atheists, and I have a very considerable atheist fan base, which has been really fun. I get some really fun atheist fan mail all the time, and it's always really encouraging to see. And certainly I have tried to build some bridges with conservatives, but I've really done a poor job at it. And part of that is because I'm a person who's trying to do something, but I'm also a real human being in process. And so those two don't always line up. And so I can say I have a vision. I want to be a bridge builder. I want to take people here. I want to lead the thought in this area. But at the same time, I may be having a really hard week and wrestling with something, and that bleeds out in your writing. And I've given myself permission to just let myself bleed out when I need to. And so it's one of those things where I know where I want to go, but I'm not always sure where I end up or where I'm going next.
That actually leads me to my next question. I wanted to talk a little bit about, on your blog, you recently did 2 series of posts. One was on hell and one was on the atonement, where you kind of thought out loud, or you invited guests on to talk about certain aspects and really delved in deeply. And we've talked a little bit about that on our show, but I'm really interested in the kind of reception that you've gotten for those 2 topics, hell and atonement, because they seem pretty important to a lot of people.
Yeah, they do. My hell series has been one that's been ongoing probably for over a year now. Some of it has ended up in Time magazine, and it's my favorite series, and I still have more aspects that I want to keep going with it. And so it's been fun. I've been able to bring in Jeff Cook, who's a philosopher and a friend of mine who has some really fantastic thoughts. My reception on the hell series has been phenomenal. In fact, I still continue to get mail and to see tweets where people are telling me that, that they crossed into my position, which is a theological position we call conditional immortality, or, evangelical conditionalism. I'm really, really surprised at the number of people who have actually crossed out of a traditional belief in hell because of that series. I've been super, super excited by that reception. Now, at the same time, I've gotten a boatload of hate mail, from it. People telling me that I'm leading people to hell, that I am, whitewashing things, that I, don't believe in right and wrong, that I don't believe in a God that is just, and so all kinds of things. I think for people who are willing to think and wrestle, I think that they will be pleasantly surprised with my position on hell, because my very first post that I ever wrote in that series was called Letting Go of Hell Without Letting Go of the Bible. And what I'm trying to see people is that you can get to this alternative view without just simply saying, I disagree with that part of the Bible, which I'm still somebody who, I affirm the inspiration of Scripture. So I don't just dump part of it, but you can actually get to my position using the Bible. And in fact, I think that my position is the dominant theme of Scripture. And so people who are willing to go back and to look at what the Bible actually says and to set aside the lens that you were taught to see things through, those people are quite often like, wow, I can't believe I didn't see this before. Because it's obvious things like hell is never mentioned in the Old Testament. One of my posts is like, why didn't God mention it before the New Testament? I get into the linguistics of the different words that are used for hell and how our modern term of the word for hell came about 400 years later. That and when you dig into those things and to look at what the Bible actually says, I'm convinced that that you walk away with a different position. So I'm thrilled with the reception on hell. The reception on the atonement was a bit more mixed, but I would actually say it's the same crowd on both sides. It's the same people that dug it, and it's the same people that hated it. There are just some people that cannot get past the idea of a God that's going to burn and torture people forever. And they cannot get past that God did this, tortured and killed his own son. And for some reason, it's almost like these people are almost impenetrable. It's just really difficult to dialogue with. But again, it's that same group of people that if they're willing to set aside and to consider, hey, maybe what I was taught isn't the right way, and what if I just go back and look at what the Bible says and give it a fair hearing, which is all I'm asking people to do. Those kind of people, I think, walk away with a very different outcome. Like I showed in the Atonement series, where it shows that God didn't even like the entire sacrificial system. It didn't, Hebrews says it didn't work and God didn't like it. So, that kind of dispels that. And then, talked about Jesus used the word ransom, and ransoms aren't paid to the parents of the kidnapped. They're paid to the one who did the kidnapping. And so I really think on both of those issues that if people would just give the Bible a fair hearing and take off the glasses that you were given in your church growing up as a kid, I can help you get somewhere else into a much better place.
And because you've been in that space before, maybe you can comment on this. Do you think that this inability to set aside the lens for a moment comes from the fact that everything is built on that one idea. Like all of the faith, all of the interpretation of the Bible, their picture of, our picture of God and of ourselves is built on that one piece. And if you pull that apart, you pull everything apart, like our identities and stuff.
I don't necessarily think it's because those pieces are so essential. For example, if they would give me a fair hearing, I would show them how belief in traditional hell is not one of those essential elements, or how the blood atonement is not one of those things. But what I do think it is I think it is just this general idea that we grow up with, that our faith is fickle and that the Bible is fickle, and that if one part is wrong, everything is wrong. So I think that really they would do this with almost any issue. I don't think it's necessarily because it's with hell or with that. I mean, for example, if you look at like Ken Ham arguing this young earth creationism, and so Ken will literally argue that our faith is a house of cards. He will say that either the earth is like 7,000 years old or the Bible is not trustworthy. And so many of us have grown up with these false binary options of everything that we were taught to believe has to be true or all of it is called into question. And so I think when you go after anything that is kind of a core belief, whether it's hell, whether it's atonement or anything like that, I think it feels so frightening and like the entire house of cards is going to collapse. But honestly, they do these things with smaller issues too, and they become equally belligerent. And I just think it's this general false belief that somehow our faith is... we don't want to admit it, but, for those people, their faith is exactly what the atheists say. The atheists, will say, geez, if I can disprove this, I can show you how it's all crap. And a lot of the fundamentalists, without even knowing it, actually believe that. But I'm somebody that my faith isn't fickle. My faith isn't a house of cards. I have arrived at if I've arrived anywhere, I've arrived at a very Christocentric, Jesus-centered faith. And that's something for me that's unshakable because I just keep going back to that. So I'm one of those people. I want to ask big questions. I want to explore possible answers. And I'm okay with not arriving at any of the answers. I don't think my faith is a house of cards. And I think so many people would be far more enlightened and find a better faith if they would realize that their faith is not as weak and fickle as they are functionally acting like.
I've never heard it explained like this, but that makes so much sense to me. And as you're talking, I'm thinking a lot about identity. One of the most surprising things, I mean, I was kind of, I feel like raised in overt and covert ways to really fear liberal progressive land. Like that, all those godless heathens out there, they're just running amok, doing whatever they want. They have no morals or values, and they certainly don't love Jesus. But one of the most surprising things that I found with my exodus is that people on the outside of those communities, conservative communities, don't base their identity in doctrine and belief like fundamentalist communities do. And so I think that it's a lot of the fear in my experiences come, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, not from even the House of Cards faith crumbling. It's from your identity and your relationship to the community that holds that identity being jeopardized. Would you say that's...
Well, yeah, exactly. I have an entire chapter in my book, Undiluted, about this issue of identity and how Jesus invites us into a new one. But I believe you're right. We get so much of our identity, from all these different things. I mean, you do get identity from doctrine. You get identity from the tradition that holds that doctrine. I'm Reformed. I'm Anabaptist. And admittedly, like for me, like being Anabaptist is a big part of my identity. But I think one of the problems is we develop these identities, which in some ways are normal and good. For example, if you look at social movement theory, which is something I talked a lot about in my doctoral work, one of the essential elements of a social movement is something called a collective identity. You can't have a movement without it. And so on one hand, like Christianity has a collective identity. But then since the Protestant Reformation, we have 40,000 other collective identities. And so those identities aren't necessarily bad, but here's where it gets into trouble. It's when we start drawing life from that. And this is the tricky thing. And this is where, I draw heavily from the work of Dr. Greg Boyd, who is one of the theologians I really look up to. And he talks a lot about this as well, that when we are drawing life from something, that object becomes an idol for us, and it defines so much about our life. And so I think people, they take these collective identities in their subcultures or their theological tradition or their local communities, and that identity becomes so strong that it actually overrides like a Christ-centered identity, and it begins to give us life to such a degree that once you have that identity, and those identities always have boundaries, there are different things within that collective identity that make you in or out. And so then you have a need to police the borders. This is something I talk about in my book, Christian Outsiders, which hasn't been published yet. But I talk about this whole need of once you draw these lines, you have to have people willing to police the borders all the time. And so to me, it just invites you into this whole mess. And I think really what you're getting at is, yes, they're getting their identity, but they're placing the identity isn't necessarily bad or wrong, but what is bad or wrong is the value that they're placing in it. And that value becomes so high, it becomes the thing you fight for instead of fighting for something better.
And that policing the borders happens on both sides of the border.
Sure. Oh yeah,
because you just recently had a conversation, on your podcast about how even in progressive Christian circles, fundamentalism, or at least the traits of fundamentalism, pop their heads up, here and there.
I've called them out frequently, and I've coined the term, the progressive Twitter police, and they annoy the crap out of me every bit as much as the conservative fundamentalists. In fact, sometimes more, because with my fundamentalist friends, they'll call or send an email telling me to repent and why I'm wrong. The progressive Twitter police, they just want to publicly shame you. That's this new thing, is this public shaming, and I just have. I don't know. Honestly, it disgusts me. And I know I pissed off a lot of progressives when I did that, and I got flack from it. And you can put this on the record. I don't care. Because it's obnoxious. I don't have time for it. I just don't have time for it. It's not life-giving. I don't think that's what following Jesus is about. Yes, I want to be a guy who fights for ideas. Yes, I'm going to take on people who I think have toxic and dangerous ideas. But I think that there's a good way to do it, a helpful way to do it. And then I just think that there's a nasty way to do it. And I don't have time for nasty people on either side.
Amen to that.
Yeah, for sure. Preach. I had emailed you because I personally was processing through the question of pacifism and coming from fundamentalism in the past.
Oh, yeah. You remember that?
My commitment to pacifism sometimes looks like a fundamentalist ideal, some ideal that exists out there that I have to ascribe to. And in some of the conversations I've had that, thinking about interviewing with you and speaking with you, that's my one question, because you have a commitment to pacifism, following Jesus. Can that ever be something that is like a trait of fundamentalism or is related to it?
That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that. And I've actually thought a lot about it since I saw the question in the pre-show notes. Yes, it really can. And this is where I personally wrestle. In that, what does it mean to be a fundamentalist? Does having some non-negotiables or things that you think aren't up for debate or about what it means to follow Jesus, does that make you fundamentalist? These are hard questions, because I confess that my theological opinion is that nonviolent enemy love is a requirement of following Jesus. From everything I've looked at and gone through, I don't see any loopholes. I think it's a requirement as much as any other requirement. That we have faith in Jesus, that we follow, that we be like him, that we love our enemies. So I do theologically hold a hard and fast position on that, not unlike fundamentalism. And that invites me into a lot of tension. And so what that has done is it has encouraged me to ask questions about how I hold my theology. Do I hold it with an iron fist, or do I hold it with a degree of humility? And as I reflected back, I realized that on this one, I have a hard time doing that, and I need to find a way to do it better. I think fundamentalism a lot of times maybe more about attitude than it is about anything else. Because even like if you look at American fundamentalism, I affirm a lot of the core beliefs they believe in. I believe in the virgin birth. I believe in the miracles of Jesus. Those are like, all part of the 5 fundamentals of faith. So I think, the fundamentalism that I have left and that I reject is more of the ideological pure, that no one else is welcome, that we will banish you if you are different. And certainly the attitude that comes along with it, being a total jerk about it. And again, I realize that I actually do have the ability to be a total jerk about pacifism. And so I'm really going to have to wrestle with that. So I don't have a hard answer in that, but I'll be transparent in that I'm really wrestling with that. Because on one hand, I have a firm theological conviction on it. I don't think it's one of those issues that is a gray area that everybody can just make up their own mind on. I think Jesus was really clear on it. But at the same time, how do I hold that position in a way that is loving, inviting, understanding, encouraging? I'm going to have to really work on that. And that's will certainly be a takeaway I'm going to take back with me from this interview, is that I personally want to wrestle on how I can hold my position in a more loving way.
Awesome.
Right on.
Right.
Yeah, thanks.
Sounds good. Well, Ben, thank you so much for all that. I feel like we could go for, another couple of hours, but we want to honor your time, of course. And is there anything that we can plug for you? Where can people find you and your work?
Sure. Well, people can follow me on Facebook /Benjamin L. Corey. It's me. You'll see a little blue check mark there beside my name. And then they can follow me on Twitter @Benjamin Corey. And, of course, the blog can be found at formerlyfundie.com. My book that's out now, available wherever books are sold, is called Undiluted, Rediscovering the Radical Message of Jesus. And hopefully next year we'll have another one out. I'm currently writing a book for Harper One, tentatively called American Heresy. But I don't know if that's the final name we'll end up with, but that's what I'm calling it right now.
Has a nice ring to it.
Yeah,
for sure. And we will have all those links that Benjamin L. Corey just talked about in the show notes at irenicast.com/60. That's irenicast.com/60. And anything else not related to this conversation, you can always contact us at irenicast.com/feedback. On the other side of the music, Benjamin is going to be joining us for a round of Jesus or Jay-Z. All right, so we're bringing back Jesus or Jay-Z. I'm pretty sure this is our 4th edition. So for those of you, if you're just tuning in, basically how this game works is each of us have come up with a couple song lyrics, and it is the job of the other co-hosts and guests to guess whether it's coming from a Christian artist or whether it's coming from a secular artist. So whether
it's a worship song or a Christian song or not.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you've spent any time in, an evangelical circle, you start to realize that it's easy to make dirty jokes from some of the worship songs. So we're kind of playing off that idea. And
I hope somebody picked that song that says something about a sloppy wet.
Oh, we did that one in the past.
Yeah, Jeff did pick that one before. Very well done. You've already earned like 12 points. So you're ahead of the crowd.
I have such a hard time singing that one in church. I'm like, wait a minute, where did they get this?
I love sloppy wet kisses, so I'll sing that all day, every day.
So doesn't my dog.
All right, who wants to start?
I only have one, so I'll go last.
Oh, Alan.
I know, I tried really hard.
Me.
Alan. We gave you so much time. We always pick on Alan. That's kind of our thing.
Jeff, it is. Yeah, I'm the punching bag of the group. It always helps to have one.
And you're the pacifist. That seems like so unjust.
Jeff, why don't you give us one of yours?
All right, I will start. Okay, so here it is. Let's get dirty. Let's get used. Let's get foolish. Let's get free. Free to be the one thing we were meant to be. Get dirty.
Oh, boy. I'm pretty sure that's a Christian song, but I can't remember who. I swear I've heard this before somewhere.
I'm betting that it's Christian music, and it's a great indictment on the state of contemporary Christian music.
I'll go with Christian, too, because of the free part. Although if this was written in like the 70s, maybe that would be, non-Christian, but because of that, I'm going to go Christian.
Well, everyone is absolutely correct. It is a Christian song. It is called Dirty, and it's by a classic Christian band, Audio Adrenaline.
Really? Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to get dirty. Wonderful.
Okay.
All right.
Let's get dirty.
Mona, you,
All right,
you got
Mona,
one?
you're up.
Yeah, I'm ready. Okay. I look a lot like Narcissus, a dark abyss of an emptiness standing on the edge of a drowning blue. I look behind my ears for the green, even my sweat smells clean. Glare off the white hurts my eyes. Gotta get out of bed and get a hammer and a nail. Learn how to use my hands, not just my head. I think myself into jail.
That sounds self-loathing enough to be a Christian song. So I'm going to say it's a Christian song.
I'll say non-Christian.
It's a little weird for me, so I'm going with non-Christian.
Weird as in how? What kind of weird?
It's just different. There was maybe like a darkness to it that I don't know. I still think non-Christian.
Yeah.
And references to like popular culture, so it's probably non-Christian. Right?
Yeah. Right.
It's the Indigo Girls, so you guys are right. Yeah.
Okay.
It's too poetic, right, for Christian pop music.
Yeah.
Well,
When I heard narcissist,
I think that's what I was saying. Yeah, right.
References to Greek
well.
mythology, they would never do that.
Well, they could have been referencing a few Christian leaders, though, with that one narcissism. Right?
Hey, I'm with you there. Yeah.
that's the second most written thing I ever wrote was about narcissism and pastoral work,
Okay.
just out of personal experience. Not that
Go
I'm a
back and read
narcissist or anything.
No, not at all. You just throw in your work there.
That's right.
So
Wait,
that everyone-
That's right.
No, that's the test for being a narcissist. If you say, if the question is, are you a narcissist? And you say, yes, you probably are. Like they're
Yeah.
self-aware enough to know, which really freaked me out, right? Because you would think that
That's
they'd
the
be
only test.
not in
Yeah.
touch with themselves.
Weird.
Okay, Ben, do you have a lyric?
I have a lyric. It says, I'll go wherever you go, so run away with my heart, run away with my hope, run away with my love.
I feel like I've heard this before.
Probably, yeah.
Run away with my love. I feel like someone would be mad at the theology of like Jesus up in heaven, but like still running away somehow. I don't know if that could work. I'm going to go with non-Christian for that
Me
reason.
too,
that I
because I
stated.
think I've heard it recently on the radio. somewhere.
You probably did.
That's
It's wherever you will go by the calling.
very nice. So that's non-Christian, right? I'm so ill-informed
Correct.
about
The calling.
Yeah.
music.
Right on.
The calling. Yeah, you know what?
I think
I thought that was so. I did hear it on the radio, and I thought it was a Christian song when I first heard it. That's funny.
I know, like it could be like the disciples serenading Jesus, in the garden. I'll go wherever you
Yeah, there
You know?
it is.
Like, no, Peter, you can't go where I am going. But show us the way, Lord. Like you could turn it into a musical.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, mine's gonna look like really banal compared to all of yours, but here it goes. And it's a great day to be alive. I know the sun is still shining when I close my eyes. Sometimes, and this is a different part of the song. That's like the main part. Here's one of the verses. Sometimes it's lonely. Sometimes it's only me and the shadows that fill this room. Sometimes I'm falling, desperately calling.
Is sun spelled S-O-N?
Sneaky.
Yes.
No, it is spelled S-U-N.
That sounds familiar. I think it's a non-Christian. I think I've recently heard something like that. Although you
I'm
can't
gonna go
tell.
with Christian. I'm gonna go.
I
With
know
Christian.
the sun's still shining when I close my eyes.
I'm going to go with non-Christian. This one's a coin flip.
It's actually a country music song from when I was a little kid. It's a great day to be alive by Travis Tritt. By virtue
That's
of being
pretty good.
country, it's definitely nominally Christian, but not explicit.
So it could get along. Yeah.
There you go.
Who's next, Jeff?
All right, here's my second one. You bring me to my knees. You make me testify. You can make a sinner change his ways. Open your gates because I can't wait to see the light. And right there is where I want to stay.
It was a Gates got me. I'm going to go with Christian on that one.
Either way, this is uncomfortable for me.
Sinner
could
got
be a
me.
euphemism. It could be a euphemism for other things.
Yeah, like I don't know. Maybe it's just my mind, but I sing worship songs as a male adolescent, and so every time I heard certain lines, it was just very difficult to think, in very worshipful ways at moments.
As a teenager?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, wow. You were tempted.
So I still hear that sometimes. I'm going to go with non-Christian.
I like being contrarian, so I'll go Christian.
Yeah, I'm going Christian because of the word sinner.
Interesting. It is non-Christian.
Ah.
It is Bruno Mars, and he's not talking about regular gates. He's talking about opening someone's legs.
That's what I thought.
Hey now.
Yeah, no, the whole song is full of very religious imagery. I thought that would be
Very nice.
Yeah.
Now, next time I hear the words pearly gates, I'm going to think about not St. Peter.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Mona, you're up.
I got a nice one. Yeah. All right. She was 17 when she came on the scene. I saw her down the hall and thought I was in a dream. She said she was from the islands, which had this brother smiling. Little did I know that I'd be on this mic testifying. I like sunsets. She likes sunrise. I'm always running late and she's always on time. I like U2 and she likes Coldplay. But something tells me we're going to be okay because she was made for me. You gave her to me. I said I'd hold on loosely, but I so want to squeeze you just right for me. And for the life of me, I can't believe I get to call her mine.
There's no way that's a Christian song.
I'm ashamed to know that I know the song.
Oh
How do you know this song, Jeff?
Listen, we don't need to know why I know this song.
Wow.
Because you sang it to your wife. That's why.
Ooh.
I absolutely did not do that.
Didn't you guys meet when you were 17, though? It would kind of work.
No, we were 18.
Okay, all right.
I thought you were going to start reading the lyrics from, I saw her standing there. We were 17. No.
Me too. That's what I thought it was. But it turned
17
into this
Dancing
amazing
Queen.
rap rock thing that you got going on. Love it. Is she into you two or am I into you two? That's the difference.
I like you too, but she likes Coldplay.
I'm going to say Christian because they like you too.
And Coldplay. They're like the Christian secular bands, right?
The bridge bands. They didn't mention Creed. I guess Creed's too old, huh?
I know what it is, so I'll...
Okay,
did everyone say
I'll
what they
go
thought
Christian.
it was?
Well, what about you, Ben? What does your spidey sense tell you?
I think that's a non-Christian one.
Okay. It is Toby Mac, you guys.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a Christian song.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Which is strange because Toby Mac's been making music for a long time. I'm pretty sure he's in about his 40s. So singing about a 17-year-old girl is just not appropriate.
Maybe he was 17 when he sang that.
Maybe. Well, it came out 2 years ago, so
Oh, okay.
I don't know. All right, well.
Ben, do you have one more?
I guess I'm the last man standing.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Just gonna stand there and watch me burn, but that's all right because I like the way it hurts. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, that's Eminem.
I was going to say.
It's a worship song about hell.
That's right.
No, I actually quoted Eminem one time when I was officiating a funeral, but I said, well, according to contemporary philosopher Marshall Mathers, and no one ever I was quoting Eminem. It was the best. Let's see.
Wow.
Okay, the actual lyrics are, I want to touch you. I want to see your face. I want to know you more.
I've seen this probably 1,000 times in my
I
life.
want to touch you. That one's burned into my
So,
memory.
hey, I
is
just
it?
said it makes me uncomfortable. That was the song I was thinking of when I said that earlier.
That's so funny. So, not to sidetrack this segment, but this whole thing reminds me of the episode of South Park 3+1. Have you guys ever seen that?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, where they just they want to be a Christian band. They just take these love songs and reword it to be about Jesus.
Yep.
Oh, I love it.
Awesome.
The priest is hearing him sing. He's like, "Wow, it sounds like you really love Jesus."
That's a great episode.
Oh, I can't believe I just admitted that I watched South Park, but whatever.
You did.
Social commentary. It's research, cultural research.
There you go. So, yes, you guys already know this one, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Definitely.
So many
It was
times.
funny.
out of the bag.
I thought this was a good choice because I don't know the song. I was just looking up lyrics.
Oh, okay.
Really?
I'm like,
that's
that's a
great
weird
choice.
song.
This was we sang this like every week, I feel like.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh.
That was
Yeah, I did
Oh,
growing
wow.
up.
youth group. Yep.
No
I
kidding.
want to know you more.
I have no idea what song this is. No way. Okay.
But you picked a highly awkward.
You
Highly
did.
awkward. I'm going to call it a heavily awkward song. Just
Oh, there you go.
to make it more awkward.
Thank you, Ben, so much for joining us this week. For those of you listening, if you enjoy what you hear and you want to support the show, you can rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred listening platform. And if you've already done that, go to irenicast.com/support for even more ways to show love to the show. And so for this week, I'm Jeff.
I'm Mona.
And I'm Alan.
And I am Benjamin L. Gorey.
Thanks for joining the conversation.
That was such a good radio voice.
That's so good.
Awesome. Thank you. This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
If that is the custom in these parts, I'm happy to.
That is the custom in these parts. That's right.